Hi guys, so wanted to say sorry about my last vlog. I've had a lot of people who've written to me and quite rightly said that, you know, I should be a lot more focused on what I'm doing the ride for and not about the cool waterproof jackets that I'm getting. And it's true, and I think I ended my last vlog kind of giving up on finding out about the different types of diabetes and not really focusing on the task at hand, so I apologise. I've also had a lot of people who've written in who are either diabetic or know people with diabetes or related to people with diabetes, who also admit to only knowing about 2, 3, max 4 different types of diabetes. So yeah, I think it will be an interesting learning curve. So yeah, on to the ride. I've also realised I should have been sharing my routes with you. It just involves taking a little snapshot of the screen of where I'm going. So I'll show you where I'm going today by putting in a photo now. That's my route, and goes down through South London, through Greenwich, through Lewisham, through Dulwich, and then back into town. We'll see. I'll get on with the ride and I'll see you when I get back. Bye! So there's been a tube strike today in London and there is non-moving traffic. Not for bikes in the bus lane though. Most intense hill training session yet. There was some really nasty short half-mile long bursts of like really steep hills. Good though for the hill training. Black cat, move. Wow, that was intense. That was probably the toughest ride I've been on so far. Having said that, I really pushed myself, and I think that's been the most satisfying ride I've done. It was just really tough. It was like a very long uphill section, probably of, I'm guessing, about 5 miles between Blackheath and the top of Dulwich by the Crystal Palace Triangle, and there were some really steep sections in there, and I don't know, for whatever reason today, it was just it felt good to like push, and I'm wondering whether it's because I had a huge lunch with loads of carbs. If you're a regular cyclist and you have huge carb meals before you do big rides, please tweet me, let me know. I'm sure it must have helped. It's a good thing to note that I thought I was going to find it tough because I had a huge lunch. Actually, I think it gave me some extra energy. That ride feels like a big step forward, a big development in terms of fitness on the bike, not just in the gym. Anyway, now that I've got my cycling a bit more developed, time to go and get my diabetes knowledge a bit more developed. .23 miles, 2¼ hours, 1,350 calories. Yeah. Well, now I've finally got the chair how it should be. Here we go. Another day, another dawn. Is that what you say? So, what I've discovered is that at the moment we are still very much in the process of discovering different types of diabetes and how to diagnose those different types of diabetes. So that's why it's quite complicated looking on the internet and talking to different sources. You get lots of different opinions about the different types of diabetes and what they're called and what symptoms they present. So, in my extensive research, and I can say that quite confidently, I'm going to give you what I think are my 6 different types of diabetes. It's quite brave. Only because I think that I've been able to, in my own head, talking to different sources, looking at internet research, find 6 distinct types of diabetes mellitus. Then I'd also like to talk about secondary diabetes. Secondary diabetes can be caused by other medical conditions. And then there are 2 syndromes, Alström syndrome and Wolfram syndrome, that I've found that are quite debilitating, that I'll talk about at the end. Firstly, I will give you my 6 different types of diabetes. So here we go. So we've already talked about type 1 and type 2 diabetes and gestational diabetes, but there are a couple of complications that I found with type 1 diabetes that I'd just like to talk a little bit about. So the first one is called brittle diabetes, or otherwise known as labile diabetes. Brittle diabetes is diagnosed when type 1 diabetics find it extremely hard to control their blood glucose levels, and it can be brought on by a number of other medical factors, absorption rates in the intestines, and also the stress and exhaustion and depression. The other complication to type 1 is something called double diabetes, and this is when type 1 diabetics develop resistance to insulin, which is a common feature of type 2. Therefore, they are diagnosed with double diabetes because they are presenting symptoms from both type 1 and type 2. So, we've already talked about 3 types of diabetes, and I would say that type 1 and type 2 were the most common types of diabetes to be diagnosed with. The 4th type of diabetes that I found is called type 1.5 diabetes. And type 1.5 diabetes can also be called type 3, latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, or slow onset type 1. So type 1.5 diabetes is called type 1.5 because it shares many symptoms with type 1 and type 2. A lot of people are misdiagnosed as type 2 diabetics because type 1.5 diabetes develops during adulthood, similar to type 2. Around 15 to 20% of people who are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes are actually misdiagnosed and could be suffering from type 1.5. So type 1.5 is a type of diabetes that sits sort of between type 1 and type 2, and it's usually diagnosed during adulthood. The 5th type of diabetes that I found is called maturity onset diabetes of the young, or diabetes modi. So diabetes modi affects between 1 to 2% of all people diagnosed with diabetes, and it's usually unrecognized in its early stages. Diabetes modi is a type of diabetes that develops usually before a patient reaches the age of 25, hence its name. Diabetes modi is also the type of diabetes that is most likely to be inherited due to a strong genetic risk factor. People who have diabetes modi usually show most of the symptoms of type 2, but typically type 2 is diagnosed in older patients, hence why diabetes modi is slightly different. So my 6th type of diabetes is called neonatal diabetes. Neonatal diabetes is a very, very rare form of diabetes that is usually diagnosed in children under 6 months of age. There are 2 types of neonatal diabetes: transient neonatal diabetes and permanent neonatal diabetes. The names are obviously quite self-explanatory, as transient neonatal diabetes often disappears within a year of the child's life, and permanent neonatal diabetes will stay with them for the rest of their lives. Neonatal diabetes is very rare, affecting about 1 in 300,000 births. So It's a very rare form of diabetes. There's also a completely different type of diabetes to diabetes mellitus. All of the 6 types I've just mentioned are diabetes mellitus, which means that they are types of diabetes that relate to blood glucose levels. This 7th type of diabetes that I've found is completely unrelated to diabetes mellitus, and it's called diabetes insipidus. And diabetes insipidus is quite simply excessive urination, which is caused by an antidiuretic hormone called a vasopressin. In some cases, the symptoms of diabetes insipidus can include urination of in excess of 20 litres a day. Because of such excessive urination, a secondary symptom is also obviously extreme thirst. And because of this extreme thirst, diabetes insipidus can also lead to extreme dehydration. Now I'm going to talk about a few different health conditions that I found which can cause secondary diabetes. So you can be diagnosed with diabetes as a secondary illness because of one of these medical conditions, and they are as follows: cystic fibrosis, hemochromatosis, chronic pancreatitis, polycystic ovary syndrome, Cushing's syndrome, pancreatic cancer, glucagonema, pancreatectomy. So those are the different health conditions that can cause secondary diabetes. So you can start suffering from diabetes during one of these illnesses. Also, you can be diagnosed with drug-induced diabetes or steroid-induced diabetes. Quite literally, you are diagnosed with diabetes because of a particular drug you've been taking to treat one of these other medical conditions. Then I have the 2 syndromes I was talking about earlier, Wolfram syndrome and Alström syndrome. Alström syndrome is a very, very rare genetic disorder, and it's characterized by a number of different features, but the most notable ones are sensitivity to light, hearing, obesity, heart problems, and type 2 diabetes, which is often why Alström syndrome is talked a lot about in the diabetic community. They think it affects about 200 families in the UK. That's it. So it's very rare. The other syndrome is called Wolfram syndrome. Usually 1 in about 500,000 children are born with Wolfram syndrome. So very, very rare. It's also known as DID-MOAD because of the key features. And these features are diabetes insipidus, which I talked about earlier, diabetes mellitus, optic atrophy, and deafness, hence DID-MOAD. So there are some very debilitating features to Wolfram syndrome, and it's very sad that you are diagnosed with Wolfram syndrome at birth and live with it for the rest of your life. Most of the features of Wolfram syndrome and Alström syndrome are treatable, but there can be lots of other health complications during life because of the syndromes. So I hope that's been useful. I hope you all stayed to listen to it. I found it incredibly interesting to explore all of the different types of diabetes mellitus and find out about diabetes insipidus, which I never knew about. And I hope you've all learned something like I have. It also has changed my attitude a lot to people that I know with diabetes. When people say they're suffering with diabetes, it's not just simply type 1 or type 2, which is what most people have heard about. There are all these other complications to diabetes. Yeah, I will see you all next week, and thank you very much for watching. Please leave me some comments here if you have anything to add to any of this information, if I've missed anything out, or tweet me, and I'll try to include it in future videos. That goes for anything that you want to say, really. Tweet me or leave any comments in the video, anything that you want to share in this kind of open forum we're creating. But yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I will see you all next week. Bye!